The grand chamber of the Cathar conclave was a place of deep time, carved from the heart of a sentient moonlet that had willingly sacrificed its celestial motion to become a bastion of thought. Its crystalline walls, veined with veins of light-fed mineral, pulsed with a slow, organic luminescence, echoing the rhythm of the dying star it orbited. The air itself was a medium of history, thick with the resonant silence of millennia, each particle seeming to hold the memory of pronouncements that had shaped the course of civilizations. Today, however, that silence was a fractured, fragile thing, threatened by the tremors of a new and unnerving age. At the heart of the chamber, arranged in a great circle of polished obsidian thrones, sat the prime electors. Their forms were geological wonders, beings of silicon and slow, deliberate life, their thoughts moving with the gravitas of tectonic plates. Presiding over them all was Prime Elector Valerius, his form a towering cathedral of gray, weathered crystal, his facets catching the ambient light and refracting it into spectra of ancient wisdom and profound weariness. His gaze, a point of focused energy deep within his core, was fixed upon the holographic display shimmering in the center of the circle, a display that showed the ruin of an empire. The Vexian hegemony was gone, not destroyed in the conventional sense, not shattered into asteroid fields or scoured into radioactive glass, but simply erased. Their fleets, which had once darkened the skies of a dozen star systems, were no more. Their fortress worlds, monuments to millennia of military engineering, were silent. And the human fleets, the agents of this impossible stillness, had already withdrawn, their vessels vanishing back into the nebulae from which they had emerged, leaving behind a silence more terrifying than any war cry. This was the source of the conclave's disquiet. This was the tremor that threatened to shatter their long peace. "They are a plague," came the resonant, sharp-edged voice of Strategos Kalen. His form, unlike Valerius's, was jagged and new, forged of black, volcanic glass that seemed to drink the light from the chamber. He was a creature of war, a mind honed for threat assessment, and in humanity he saw the ultimate threat. The data is undeniable. The Vexian hegemony, for all its perfidy and arrogance, was a galactic power. Their martial traditions were ancient before the humans had even conceived of leaving their cradle. Their fleets were vast, their technology formidable. The Vex came with everything and still lost. They were not merely defeated, they were unmade. He gestured with a crystalline limb towards the swirling data cloud. It showed timelines, energy signatures, mass displacements. It showed the methodical, terrifyingly efficient dismantling of the Vexian war machine. There were no grand, chaotic fleet engagements, no pitched battles that would be sung of in epics. There was only a cold, surgical process. A Vexian armada would mobilize, and then its power signatures would simply cease. A fortified system would be on high alert, and then its orbital platforms would be gone, their constituent atoms seemingly returned to the interstellar medium. It was a war without glory, without honor, without any of the familiar metrics by which the Cathar understood conflict. "This was not a war," Kalen continued, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the obsidian floor. "It was an extermination. The humans have revealed a capacity for annihilation that surpasses even the Gyrask swarm. They fought a war of total retribution for a betrayal, and in doing so have shown themselves to be vindictive, emotionally volatile, and disproportionately powerful. They are a destabilizing force. A species that can erase a rival so completely, so silently, is a species that cannot be trusted. They must be contained. We must issue a proclamation, declare their sphere of influence a quarantine zone, and prepare our border fleets for the inevitable." Silence returned to the chamber, heavier this time. Valerius let Kalen's words settle, let them find purchase in the minds of the other electors. He could feel their anxieties, their shared fear of this new, incomprehensible power. The humans, they had been quiet allies in the Great Gyrask War, small, soft-bodied beings of ephemeral lifespans and bewilderingly rapid technological advancement. The Cathar had viewed them with a sort of detached paternalism, as one might a clever, if unpredictable, younger species. They were brave, yes. Their fleets had held the line at the siege of Corridon Primus when even the mighty Vexian flotillas had considered a tactical withdrawal. They were steadfast, but they were also seen as creatures of passion, their diplomacy often colored by strange, illogical concepts like hope and despair. They were not like the Cathar, whose decisions were the product of centuries of glacial contemplation. "You see only the result, Strategos," Valerius finally spoke, his voice the sound of mountains grinding, slow but possessed of immense weight. You do not see the cause. You speak of the Vexian betrayal as a mere pretext for this outcome. Have you forgotten what that betrayal cost? Have you forgotten the 7th Human Expeditionary Fleet and our own 3rd Axiomatic Guard sacrificed, abandoned? The Vex collapsed the Arimdan Gate while our forces and the humans were still engaged with the swarm's primary hive fleet. They sealed the gate behind them, condemning billions to a fight they could not win, all to preserve their own hulls from being scratched. It was an act of cowardice and treachery unparalleled in the memory of this conclave. An act of self-preservation, Kalen countered, his form rigid with conviction. A cold, tactical decision. The Vex determined the battle was lost and cut their losses. It was dishonorable, yes, but it was logical. The human response, however, was not. It was emotional. It was rage, scaled up to an industrial level. And that is what makes them so dangerous. A species that wields such power, yet is driven by the whims of fleeting emotion, is a threat to all rational life. Valerius turned his inner gaze towards the data again. Kalen was not entirely wrong. The sheer totality of the human response was difficult to comprehend. The Cathar had expected a punitive war, border skirmishes, the seizure of key Vexian assets. They had anticipated a long, grinding conflict that would bleed both powers dry. Instead, the war had been swift, silent, and absolute. The humans had not conquered the Vex. They had not occupied their worlds or seized their resources. They had simply removed them from the galactic stage. But there were anomalies in the data, details that Kalen, in his haste to see a monster, had overlooked. There were no records of planetary bombardment. No widespread civilian casualties reported through the few remaining neutral channels. The Vexian homeworld, a jewel of art and culture, was not a cinder. It was just quiet. Its global power grid was dark. Its orbital industries were gone. Its people were alive but isolated, thrown back into a pre-industrial state, their connection to the stars severed as if by a divine hand. This was not the work of pure rage. Rage was chaotic, indiscriminate. This was something else. Something colder, more precise, and in its way, more terrifying. "We are beings of deep time," Valerius said, his voice resonating through the chamber. "Our perspective is our greatest strength. We do not make decisions based on the heat of a single moment or the fear of a single outcome. We have observed the humans for centuries. We saw them claw their way from their home world, driven by a relentless curiosity. We saw them stumble into the galactic community, young and naive, yet possessed of a strange resilience. We saw them stand with us against the Gyrask, their courage a bright, hot flame against the cold, unthinking tide of the swarm. And now we see this. We cannot judge them on this act alone without understanding the philosophy that drove it." "Philosophy?" Kalen scoffed, the sound like shattering crystal. "What philosophy is there in total war? They have created a power vacuum, Prime Elector, a vacuum that lesser, more opportunistic species will now rush to fill. They have destabilized the entire sector. Their actions were reckless." "Or perhaps," a third voice interjected, soft and melodic, from an elector named Lyra whose form was of a pale, luminous quartz, "they were precisely the opposite of reckless. Perhaps they were deliberate in a way we cannot yet fathom. Consider the silence. They made no grand proclamations of victory. They issued no threats to neighboring powers. They simply executed their goal and withdrew. It is the behavior of a surgeon, not a berserker. They identified a sickness, Vexian perfidy, and they excised it. The question we must ask is not whether the surgery was brutal, but whether the patient, the galaxy itself, will be healthier for it." Valerius inclined his great form slightly in Lyra's direction. She had always been one to see the patterns beneath the surface, the logic hidden within apparent chaos. Her words resonated with the unease in his own core. He had felt at the moment he had reviewed the final data from the Vexian system, a profound sense of wrongness, of a puzzle whose pieces did not fit the picture Kalen was painting. It was then that a new light blossomed in the center of the chamber, a soft, insistent chime echoing through the hall. It was a priority communication request, one that bypassed all but the most senior diplomatic channels. It was a human vessel. It had just translated from hyperspace at the precise, pre-calculated edge of Cathar sovereign territory, neither threateningly close nor disrespectfully distant. It was waiting, engine signatures placid, weapon ports sealed, broadcasting a simple, formal request for audience with the conclave. The chamber fell into a profound hush. The theoretical had just become terrifyingly real. The architects of the galaxy's greatest vanishing act were at their door, and they were asking to be let in. Kalen's form seemed to darken. "It is a challenge, a demonstration of their audacity. They unmake one of our neighbors and then immediately seek audience as if to demand our approval or our submission. We should refuse, power up the border defenses, show them that the Cathar are not so easily intimidated. And what would that accomplish, strategos? Valerius's voice was calm but held a core of immutable authority. It would show them that we are ruled by fear, that we are no different from the Vex, reacting with aggression to that which we do not understand. We will grant them an audience, we will listen, and we will learn we are the Cathar, we do not hide from the unknown, we study it. He made a minute gesture, a shift in the light patterns across his crystalline surface. The signal was accepted. A single human ambassador would be permitted to approach the conclave's seat. The tension in the chamber did not dissipate. It coiled, tightened, becoming a palpable presence. Every elector, even Kalen, settled into a state of deep, watchful stillness. They were about to meet the creators of the Great Silence, the species that had taught the galaxy a new and terrible definition of loss. The human ship, Valerius noted from the tactical display that bloomed in his mind's eye, was small, an unarmed diplomatic courier. It was an insignificant vessel, yet it felt like the harbinger of a storm that could reshape their universe. The weight of millennia seemed to press down on him as he waited. The future of the galaxy, he suspected, would not be decided by fleets and armies, but by the words that would be spoken in this chamber. The great portal at the far end of the chamber irised open, admitting a soft, yellow-white light from the antechamber beyond. The air pressure shifted slightly, a subtle whisper that announced the arrival of a foreign atmosphere, contained and filtered but alien nonetheless. Into this hall of ancient, geological beings walked a single, small, soft-skinned creature. She was bipedal, her movements fluid and impossibly swift to the Cathar's perception. She wore a simple, unadorned uniform of deep blue, its fabric seeming to absorb the chamber's crystalline light rather than reflect it. Her face was a canvas of delicate, mobile features, her eyes dark, deep pools of biological uncertainty. She carried no weapons, wore no armor, and was flanked by no guards. She was utterly, terrifyingly vulnerable. And yet she projected an aura of absolute calm, a stillness that seemed to match, and in some ways challenge, the ancient silence of the conclave itself. She stopped at the designated point in the center of the chamber, directly beneath the swirling holographic data cloud that still depicted the ghost of the Vexian Empire. She did not bow, but gave a slow, deliberate nod of her head, a gesture of respect that was clearly learned but not subservient. Her gaze swept across the assembled electors, meeting each one's focal point without flinching, before finally settling on Valerius. "I am Ambassador Alara Vance of the Terran Alliance," she said. Her voice, translated through a discreet device, was clear and measured, devoid of any discernible emotion. It was a strangely placid sound in a chamber built for resonant, booming pronouncements. "I thank the Cathar Conclave for granting this audience. We come to you now, as we came to you in the time of the Gyrask War, as partners in the preservation of galactic stability." The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the air, thick and heavy. Strategos Kalen's form flared with a sharp, internal light, a sign of profound agitation. He broke protocol, his voice cutting through the formal silence. "Partners in stability," he boomed, the sound cracking the air. "You have just single-handedly destabilized an entire galactic quadrant. You have annihilated a founding member of the Galactic Compact. You have demonstrated a capacity for destruction that inspires not partnership but fear. You speak of stability while standing in the shadow of the genocide you have committed." Ambassador Vance did not react to his outburst. Her expression did not change. She simply waited for him to finish, her posture one of patient stillness. When he fell silent, she turned her gaze to him. "Strategos Kalen," she said, her tone remaining perfectly even. "We understand your perspective. Your sensors have shown you an outcome, and you have interpreted it through the lens of your own history and understanding of conflict. But your data is incomplete. You see the what, but you do not see the why, and you do not see the how. There was no genocide." "No genocide?" Kalen's voice was a tremor of incredulous rage. "The Vexian hegemony is gone. Their fleets, their industries, their place in this galaxy vanished. What would you call it then? A disagreement." "We would call it a disassemblage," Vance replied, her choice of words so strange, so clinical, that it momentarily stunned even Kalen into silence. "A profound and necessary course correction. We have not destroyed the Vexian people. We have destroyed their capacity to betray the galactic community ever again." She raised a hand, and from a small device on her wrist, a new set of data streams flowed into the central holographic display, merging with the Cathar's own information. The new data was raw, unredacted, and of a resolution far beyond what the Conclave's long-range sensors could capture. It showed the Vexian betrayal at the Aramdan Gate not as a tactical retreat, but as a deliberate, calculated act of mass murder. Human comms channels, filled with the final, desperate pleas for aid. Cathar ship signals, blinking out one by one. And the Vexian fleet commander's internal log, now laid bare, explicitly stating the intention to sacrifice their allies to ensure the hegemony's fleet remained at full strength for any post-war power grabs. It was a portrait of cold, premeditated treachery. The Vex did not simply make a tactical error, Vance continued, her voice now carrying a subtle, hard edge like diamond pressed against steel. They violated a fundamental principle upon which any meaningful galactic community must be built: trust. In a universe that contains threats like the Gyrask swarm, trust is not a luxury. It is the single most critical strategic asset we possess. The Vex demonstrated that to them, trust was a disposable commodity. They made a calculation that their own power was more valuable than the lives of their allies and the stability of the galaxy. Our response was not born of rage, strategos. It was born of a far colder and more absolute logic. A species that holds such a philosophy cannot be allowed to wield interstellar power. It is a contagion, and so we removed it. Valerius focused his consciousness on the new data. He saw now what had been missing from their own logs. He saw the human ships turning back, not in retreat, but to provide covering fire for the Cathar vessels, to give them a few more precious seconds before the gate collapsed. He saw a human capital ship, its engines critical, deliberately positioning itself between a Cathar command cruiser and a Gyrask behemoth, sacrificing itself to save his own people. The humans had not just been steadfast. They had been noble, even in the face of certain doom. The Vexian betrayal was, in light of this new information, an act of such profound dishonor that it beggared belief. "You speak of logic," Valerius said, his own voice now quieter, more contemplative. "But the result was absolute. You erased their power, you dismantled their civilization. How is such an extreme measure a logical act?" This was the crux of the matter. The why was now clearer, but the how and the sheer totality of it remained terrifying. Vance turned her gaze back to him, and for the first time Valerius thought he detected a flicker of something in her eyes, a depth of ancient sorrow that seemed at odds with her species' short lifespan. "Because Prime Elector," she said, "we did not want to destroy them. To destroy a people is to admit failure. It is to resort to the same crude calculus of annihilation that the Gyrask represents. We believe that every sentient species has the potential for redemption, for change. But to change, they must be stripped of the tools and the philosophy that led them astray. We could have fractured their worlds. We could have slain their leaders and scattered their people. It would have been simpler. But that would have planted seeds of hatred that would have bloomed into another war 1,000 years from now. We do not have time for that." She gestured again to the display. The image shifted, zooming in on the Vexian homeworld. The Cathar data had shown it as dark, its power grids offline. The human data showed why. It was a swarm of nanites, uncountable, impossibly small machines moving like a silver mist across the planet's surface. They were not destroying buildings. They were deconstructing them, atom by atom. Every factory, every shipyard, every weapons forge, every military data center, all of it was being carefully, methodically taken apart. The raw materials were then ejected into the planet's upper atmosphere, forming new, shimmering rings of inert dust around the world. "We call it architectural nanite deconstruction," Vance explained, her voice a calm narrative over the almost holy terror of the images. "It is precise. We can target specific molecular structures. We can erase a tank without harming the ground it sits on. We can disassemble a starship in orbit without affecting the civilian spaceport next to it. We targeted every single piece of technology that underpinned the Vexian war machine. We took apart their fleets, their fortifications, their industries, and even their centralized data networks. We left their homes, their cultural archives, their farms, their medical facilities, and their people completely untouched." The chamber was utterly silent. The concept was so far beyond the Cathar's own technological and philosophical framework that it was difficult to process. They were masters of macro-scale engineering, of gravitational manipulation and stellar energy. But this was godlike in its precision and scale. To unmake an entire civilization's technological base without harming a single civilian. It was not war. It was something far more profound. "The Vexian people are still there," Vance said. "They have been returned to a pre-industrial state, forced to look to each other, to their own world instead of the stars. They have been given a chance to build a new society, one not founded on conquest and betrayal. In a few thousand years, perhaps they will develop a different philosophy. Perhaps they will be ready to rejoin the galactic community. We believe in that possibility. But we could not allow the Vexian hegemony, the political and military entity that chose betrayal, to continue to exist. So we took its tools away. We took its ability to make war. Valerius finally understood. The phrase Kalen had used, "they came with everything and still lost," had been a misunderstanding. The humans had not engaged the Vexian war machine on its own terms. They had simply ignored it. They had refused to fight a conventional war of ship against ship, of army against army. They had treated the entire Vexian military as an irrelevance, a symptom of the disease, and had focused instead on surgically removing the disease itself, the industrial and technological capacity for interstellar violence. The Vex lost because they had prepared for a war, while the humans had executed a philosophical judgment. Strategos Kalen was silent, his jagged form unmoving. The foundation of his argument, his fear of a rampaging emotional monster, had been systematically dismantled. He was confronted not with barbarism, but with a logic so cold, so absolute, it was more intimidating than any fleet. To be deemed philosophically unsound by humanity was not to face their anger, but to face their precision. To be erased not from existence, but from relevance. "You have appointed yourselves the arbiters of the galaxy," Kalen finally said, his voice quiet, stripped of its earlier fire. "By what right do you make such judgments?" "By the right of necessity," Vance replied, her voice softening but losing none of its weight. "The right of a community to protect itself from its most dangerous members. We did not seek this role, but the Gyrask War taught us a terrible lesson. The universe is not a benign place. There are forces in the void that are ancient, vast, and inimical to all life. The Gyrask swarm was only one such force. A galaxy divided by mistrust, where allies betray one another for short-term gain, will not survive what is to come. It will be consumed. We did what we did to the Vex not just as retribution for the past, but as a necessary preparation for the future. We are forging an alliance that can be trusted. An alliance where every member understands that betrayal is not an option because the price is not defeat, but obsolescence." Her words fell into the silence of the chamber, and Valerius felt a profound shift in his own ancient consciousness. The fear of humanity was receding, replaced by a deep and unsettling awe. He had viewed them as young, as passionate and unpredictable. He saw now that their youth was a source of their terrifying clarity. Unburdened by millennia of ingrained dogma and ritualized conflict, they saw the fundamental truths of the universe with a stark, unforgiving logic. And they were not afraid to act upon those truths, no matter the scale. They were not conquerors, they were guardians, and their methods were as alien and overwhelming as the threats they foresaw. He looked at the calm, small figure in the center of his hall, and for the first time, he saw her not as a representative of a young and dangerous race, but as an emissary of the future. A future that the Cathar, in all their ancient wisdom, had failed to prepare for. "You speak of other threats," Valeria said, his voice a low hum that resonated with the very stone of the chamber. "Threats greater than the Gyrask." Ambassador Vance gave a slow, somber nod. "The Gyrask were not an invasion, Prime Elector. We now believe they were refugees." The conclave stirred, a collective tremor of disbelief and alarm running through the assembled electors. The Gyrask swarm had been the most devastating force in galactic history, a mindless tide of biological horrors that consumed entire star systems. The idea that they were fleeing from something was almost inconceivable. What could possibly frighten such a force? "During the disassemblage of the Vexian core archives," Vance continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the immense hall, "we uncovered data they had kept hidden from all their allies. It was the true reason for their desperate self-preservation, the reason they were so willing to sacrifice anyone to maintain their full military strength. They had detected something long ago at the very edge of the galactic disk, a signal." She gestured to the holographic display one last time. The images of the Vexian homeworld, of the nanite clouds and the silent cities dissolved. They were replaced by something far simpler and infinitely more chilling. It was a wave form, stark and repeating, against a backdrop of the absolute black of intergalactic space. It was not a language. It was not a message of greeting or a beacon of distress. It was a pattern of such immense and ancient power that it was causing subtle, periodic gravitational distortions even at this impossible distance. "Our finest minds have analyzed this signal for months," Vance said. "It is not a communication. We believe it is a boundary marker, a warning. The Vex believed it was from some ancient, long-dead empire delineating their former territory. We believe they were wrong. It is not ancient. It is active, and it is not marking the edge of a forgotten empire. It is marking the edge of a hunting ground. A deep, primal coldness seeped into Valerius's core, a feeling his kind had not experienced in eons. His mind raced through the most ancient of the Cathar's own legends, the deep myths from before they had even reached for the stars. Tales of the great silence between the stars, of a void that was not empty but waiting. A void from which scout ships and exploratory probes sent into the deep black would never return. They had been dismissed as primitive fears, the superstitions of a younger species. But now, the signal is slowly moving, Vance stated, her voice flat, a pronouncement of doom delivered with the calm of a weather report. It is contracting. The area it delineates is shrinking, but the energy readings are not diminishing. They are concentrating. Something out there in the absolute dark is consuming galaxies, and it is slowly, patiently turning its attention to ours. The Gyrask were simply the first wave of creatures running from a fire that is consuming everything behind them. She lowered her hand, and the display vanished, plunging the chamber back into its own soft, crystalline light. The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of tension or of contemplation. It was the silence of revelation, the profound, hollow quiet that comes when one's understanding of the universe is shattered and rebuilt into something far larger and more terrifying. The Vexian betrayal, the human response, it all clicked into place in Valerius's mind with the terrible, final sound of a tomb door sealing shut. Humanity's actions were not about the past. They were not about punishing the Vex for their treachery. They were about the future. They were about preparing the galaxy for a war for its very existence. They were scouring the house of weakness, of disloyalty, of internal rot before the true storm arrived. They were forcing the galactic community to be strong, to be united, to be trustworthy, because they knew that anything less would mean utter and absolute extinction. They had not betrayed their allies in a war. They had taken an ally who betrayed the very concept of alliance and removed them from the board, not out of anger, but to clear the way for a war that would demand a level of unity and sacrifice the galaxy had never known. Valerius looked from Kalen, who was now as still and silent as carved stone, to Lyra, whose luminous form pulsed with a slow, somber light, and then back to the human ambassador. In her small, fragile frame, he saw a strength that dwarfed the geological might of his own species. It was the strength of purpose, of a species that had looked into the ultimate abyss and had not despaired, but had instead begun the slow, methodical, and even brutal work of preparing for the fight. "You did not come here to ask for our approval," Valerius said, his voice no longer a judgment but a statement of fact. "You came here to offer us a choice." "Yes," Ambassador Vance replied. "To stand with us as a unified, trustworthy whole, or to stand alone. The Cathar are an ancient and honorable people. Your wisdom is as deep as your history. We believe you will make the right choice, but we had to be certain you understood the stakes. We had to be certain you understood why the Vexian hegemony could not be allowed to stand with us. We need partners, not liabilities." The Prime Elector of the Cathar Conclave, a being who had witnessed the birth and death of stars, inclined his head in a gesture of profound, unprecedented respect to the small, soft-skinned creature from a young and violent world. The fear was gone, replaced by a clarity as sharp and as cold as the void between galaxies. The squabbles of empires, the betrayals and alliances that had defined their history, all of it seemed like the fleeting games of children in the shadow of this new, final truth. Humanity had not brought war to their doorstep. They had brought a warning, and with it, a terrible, necessary, and perhaps even hopeful new beginning. The future would not be one of peace. But for the first time in millennia, Valerius felt that it would be a future of purpose. United against the encroaching dark with these strange, terrifying, and unshakably logical beings at their side. They had to be. For the alternative was to be erased, not by a precise nanite cloud, but by an indifferent and all-consuming hunger from the silence between the stars.